Hi, my name is August, and it's been over 5 years since I've started reading visual novels on this channel. I like reading visual novels. However, there have been plenty of regrets. A handful of titles that ranged from disappointing to frustrating to unremarkable to just being outright infuriating. So, what if I were to rate them all in comparison to one another? Today, I'm rating every one of my lowest ranked visual novels from my previous yearly tier list videos to show you which ones I found very average to those I very much did not like. Starting with a visual novel with a very promising premise and attractive artwork. It's even written by one of the most popular light novel authors out there. The problem is that it's plagued with crippling writing flaws of the author's own intent. Introducing Akatsuki No Go, a visual novel where the absolute worst bodyguard is tasked with protecting the most prestigious high-class ladies. After withdrawing from his bodyguard training school, Kaito ends up saving a prestigious lady from a kidnapping. But just as he's about to leave, Reika Nikaido, a flawless yet prideful woman infamous for rejecting all of her handlers, declares that Kaito will be her new bodyguard. Akatsuki No Go is a really strange game, for while it sounds like a thriller, action-heavy visual novel with a touch of romance, it acts more like a wacky slice-of-life comedy instead. There's plenty of comedic skits and sharp-tongued banter that, while occasionally funny, forgets to actually tell an ongoing story, it seems. What's worse is that the visual novel has a habit of introducing plot threads and side characters that feel significant, only to never come back to them at all. Those two issues together directly result in my problem with the game's heroine routes. Most, if not all of them, suffer from a lack of build-up, feeling rushed and inconclusive. Sure, this may be the first installment of a trilogy, but man, I felt so unsatisfied after I finished these routes. Much to the point that I'm actively questioning whether I wanted to even finish this trilogy. Plot and character development aside, I can't even wholeheartedly stand by its comedic side too. Kaito himself can come across as pretty unlikable. A fair amount of jokes in here are very harsh and outright mean, and it's not just from Kaito too. And even with all of that, there's still Akatsuki no Go's crude, edgy ruthlessness in one of the heroine routes that left a very bad aftertaste with how uncomfortable the explicit content is in one outlier scene. Maybe I'll finish the trilogy at some point, but just as a standalone, reading this was unfulfilling for sure. C tier. Next up, Kuruinu, the adult, edgy, dark fantasy eroge where it pursues the most ruthless, degenerate extremes, forcing women into servitude after conquering them in battle. A name infamous for its epic anime adaptation. I read Kuruinu for my No Nut November theme month to really explore the origins of this cursed piece of media. And what I got was Berserk's edgier younger brother who, instead of slaying monsters, was slaying big titty women instead. The visual novel attempts to hype up this grand war between Volt and his mercenary army versus the different kingdoms, but it skips that entire process and cuts to Volt winning over the forces. No detailed sword fights, no giant war battles, just a shot of them heading into battle, and the next thing you know, it's pillaging time. Really, you could argue that the actual story is seeing the heroines get slowly corrupted, but it's buried between the unique H-scene scenarios with them moaning and screaming in various different ways. It's less psychological transformation and more how much torture does it take to break a body. Kuruinu is 100% fetish material. I suppose if you really wanted to check out the source material, it's there, but it's funny. I honestly think that you would get more gratification from the anime adaptation instead. Giving this a D. Next up, Meteor World actor Badge and Dagger, what I would call the most unsatisfying visual novel I've read. Sure, I understand being the second installment of a trilogy series, not fully resolving the main story, but I'm not a fan of answering none of the ongoing questions and continuing to add more. Badge and Dagger continues Detective Ruka's wild adventures in the 7th Republic, a fantasy metropolitan city full of different races and superpowered humans. Badge and Dagger is the continuation of the main story, with Ruka not pursuing any of the heroines from the first game, this time featuring the female heroines that arguably hate him the most. Now let me state, Meteor World actor has charm. This is an entertaining urban fantasy action detective visual novel, one with a shitty yet interesting protagonist. I am here for Ruka's chaotic handling of his cases and the cutthroat banter between all of the characters. Meteor World actor is one of my favorite visual novels of all time. But my god, does it scream inconclusive. The story based on the first game has unresolved plot details, open-ended heroine routes, and arguably surface-level world building. It ends on this: the battle will continue, with a larger mystery and conflict unresolved. With Badge and Dagger, yes, the main plot does continue, however, reading this basically felt like padding filler meant to bring you to the third game. This installment answers very little and only proceeds to complicate things even further by adding new characters and more obstacles to deepen this rabbit hole. The worst possible feeling was reading through all of this just to get to that ending cliffhanger that demands playing that final game. Other complaints reside in the fact that the two heroine routes are also much weaker in storytelling and heroine appeal. In fact, one of them isn't even an actual route. I also do think that the Allworks quality has dropped a bit. Certain CGs in particular look unrefined and unpolished compared to the first game. Badge and Dagger is not very good as a standalone. Yes, it might be Meteor World Actor with all of its fun parts, but I'm still gonna criticize it for how unsatisfying and lacking the actual story in this is. C tier. I'm in a predicament here. Really, do I call Starless Nymphomaniac's Paradise bad because it's 100% fetish material, or is it actually top tier because of it committing to being 100% fetish material? Let me start off by saying that Starless should only be recommended to those with certain ultra-specific tastes in explicit fiction, or those morbidly curious by this game's content and horrific bad endings. Or if you love sadistic MILFs. Brought to you by the creator of Bible Black, Starless follows the story of a college boy named Sawatari accepting a job offer from the Mamiya Mansion, home to a very rich and well-endowed family. What he didn't realize is that becoming their servant also means pleasing all of the women in the household on many, many intimate levels. Story structure-wise, Starless is a collection of 8 scenes one after another, where the sexy yet sadistic mistresses forces and manipulates its pitiful characters into many repulsive scenarios. These servants are powerless to the Mamiya family and their psychotic whims, unaware of how bad things could truly get. The game's 9 bad endings are a testament to that. I read this from my No Nut November themed month, but maybe I should have read this in October for how horrified and scarred I was at the end of it all. Now, I'm not a newbie when it comes to brutal, explicit content. Hell, I could even handle the worst of Eroguro. But my problem with Starless is that it really feels like I was just going through the motions here. Just nothing but its characters going at it for hours and seeing all the different flavors of femdom each day. Starless and other games by its same creator is fulfilling its erotic niche perfectly. I respect it. I understand what it's trying to do. It is not for me, despite how hot the MILFs are. C tier. And now, time for me to talk about World End Syndrome, a murder mystery X high school rom-com dating sim, where in a very bold move, the story proceeds to ignore the murders until the last 2 routes of the game. After the death of his sister, our main character moves to the coastal town of Mihate to escape his past. There, he tries to rebuild his life, and at first everything is going fine for him, until he and his friends end up dying on the last day of summer. I really should just call this more of a rom-com than a murder mystery, because a lot of time is spent doing uninteresting slice-of-life events. Sure, romance is a big part of this. I just found it so painfully average with everything you can predictably expect from a romance route-based visual novel. And then the story slams you with an abrupt bookend. Oh hey, remember, people die in the end, with like none or barely any hints about the ongoing mystery. The characters are nothing special. The heroines are forgettable, and while I hate this specific guy for being an insufferable, idiotic, token best friend class clown, I also equally hate the main character the same amount for being a boring self-insert character that occasionally goes off on pretentious, depressing monologues. After spending several hours going through very average rom-com antics, I finally got my answers to the mystery. Now, I will admit there are some amusing twists and reveals, but looking back, man, that payoff was not worth it at all. I wasted my time with this one. F tier. And now, next up, a visual novel I saw with lots of potential, only for it to end up being my most frustrating visual novel I've ever read. Sure, this work might have a unique writing style, but Perennial Dusk Kinsenka was not my best first impression of the author. The story is about Sai Tachibana, our high school serial killer who claims he's incapable of feeling human emotions, until one day he has a chance meeting with an aloof yet beautiful girl, Benio Matsuri, where for the first time in his life, his heart is struck with the feelings of true love at first sight, ultimately leading him into a world of eternal twilight full of exorcists that deal with the spirits of the dead. Now, to be fair, there are some valid qualities to it. It's an introspective, character-driven story about people with emotional trauma searching for meaning and happiness. A huge focus is dedicated to how these characters deal with their past and yet strive to express compassion for the people they deeply care about who's also going through equally painful stuff. This title should be up my alley. play. But I was not having a good time. The pacing is torturous. Characters talk endlessly about deep philosophical concepts, they have plenty of eternal monologues, and their painful backstories are so long-winded that it drags everything to a crawl. The actual writing is phrased in this reflective, thought-provoking way, which is fitting, but at some point, I actually started falling asleep. Writing quality aside, it also doesn't help when the serial killer protagonist is a very hard sell alone. I'll admit, it's an interesting concept and he does change, but then he makes some very questionable decisions that invalidate any positive opinion I had of him. There's other negatives like the uselessness of the side characters and how the story gets unexpectedly brutal and cruel in some backstories, really only to sell how depressing and pitiful its characters are. Honestly, it would be much lower, but the vibes and late game content help it somewhat. Perennial Dusk Kinsenka is written by Yukito Urashibara, and I could only maybe recommend this to those hardcore fans of his. But as someone with no connection to him, this was just a dull read, made even more frustrating by the potential I saw in this. C tier. Next up, one of the most unique concepts for a post-apocalyptic world I've seen, where wave-eating robotic pigeons cause the downfall of humanity, the future radio and the artificial pigeons. This visual novel was made by Laplacian, the same studio behind Cyanotype Daydream, a story that is one of my personal favorites. I was so excited for future radio afterwards, which made the disappointment hit that much harder after I read it. On the anniversary of his parents' death, killed in a plane crash caused by the wave-eating birds, our main character Sora visits the abandoned crash site. He brings a gift for others who have lost loved ones in the tragedy, an old radio. There's something special about his radios though. They're able to pick up broadcasts, and that very night, Sora's radio receives an ominous message. He will die when the blue sky crashes into Earth. Determined to prevent this fate, Sora and his friends devise a plan to stop the crash, but standing in their way is Kaguya Hazuki, daughter of Izana Hazuki, the very inventor of the artificial pigeons. This is a title that had everything set up to be a deeply emotional sci-fi romance drama. The setting premise is fascinating, and the relationship dynamic between Sora and Kaguya is intriguing, but when I actually read it, it felt off. The story sets up these emotional stakes and signs of intimacy, but there's no passion behind it. It felt hollow, and I really hated that. I understood how these two people were falling for each other, but it never sold me on it. Comes across as forced, rushed. Considering that this is the main couple and the main appeal of the title, that's especially disappointing. And it doesn't help that I had other problems with Future Radio too. For such a serious sci-fi romance drama, the most jarring thing has to be the crass humor and the absurdist antics. The tomfoolery of this character alone totally clashes with Future Radio's premise. On top of that, she and one other of the four heroines in here proceeds to deviate away from the actual main premise. In my eyes, this is such a waste. The Future Radio and the artificial pigeons had potential here. There are some great narrative set pieces and high concept moments, but the actual execution here had faults and other distracting problems. C tier. Next up, a very unique title, Alpha Nighthawk, a sci-fi fantasy visual novel with anthropomorphic animals, AT+ content included. It's got Lyresoft's distinct art style, and it does have some interesting world-building ideas, but this visual novel is easily a case of style, no substance. In this world, humanity is endangered by a giant space rose named Quansalo, launching thorns from space, destroying cities on Earth, and leaving behind infected monsters. However, there are still some living in these devastated areas, including our main character, ex-retired military pilot Ichizo Yodaka. He fights to protect the residents in the zone that he lives in until one day he soon stumbles upon Miria Hakone, a brand new novice combat pilot who crash-landed on Earth. A boy meets girl sci-fi romance story, except I can't stand any of it. It's got bluntly written dialogue, an idiotic main heroine that can get frustrating to watch, an unconvincing romance dynamic with a very morally questionable start to their relationship, and for all of this being a part 1 story of a trilogy, Alpha Nighthawk came off as an uneventful prologue that did not convince me to keep staying. Now, at the start, I was merely curious. I don't mind any of the elements it marketed. I was neutral towards the sci-fi mechs, the anthropomorphic animals, and the budding romance between both humans and said anthropomorphic animals. But as I kept reading, I got more and more uncomfortable with how questionably dark its world building got. Slavery, genetic experimentation, half-breed genocide, to even interracial sexual power dynamics. I was just not a fan of the ultra-rough R18 BDSM. Straight up, I did not like Alpha Nighthawk. D tier. And now let me tell you of the worst romance visual novel I've read. A title that is probably the most anime rom-com VN out there, with all the classic tropes and tricks in the book, despite it being set in a college setting. Sugar Style follows Katsuki Oribe as he finds himself in either the most luckiest position of his life or the most unfortunate circumstance of his own survival, being the only male in an all-female dorm. Cue all of the weird, crazy, and absurd adventures from living the college dorm experience in his search to fall in love and get a girlfriend. Now, to its credit, the wacky antics is its strongest point. Sugar Style is immature, outrageous, and free-spirited. It does not hold back on how dumb things can get, and the developers are known for it. However, there's only so much of it I could take. The corny, tropey jokes, the overly used sound effects, and the absurd silliness from the main character's sex craze antics wore me out. It also doesn't help that I've read other titles that can do this type of humor with sharper writing and better execution. The story structure doesn't do it any favors either. It blends common route segments, special events, and heroine route scenes all together in a way that constantly breaks the reading flow. Reading new routes means skipping through past read sections just to read 5 minutes of dialogue, only to skip again. It's so disorienting. But the biggest issue, and arguably the worst sign for a romance visual novel, the heroines are just okay. None of them really captivated me. I found them very forgettable, and that's fatal. Easily the worst SME title out of their entire library for me. Sugar Style gets a C. Now, let me tell you of the worst horror visual novel I've read. A supernatural investigative mystery, one that even has a nice touch of cute romance in it, but I would rather describe it more like a tacky horror title full of pure shock value edgy content. Sakon Namorei Dreamers is about a young boy named Shinji that gained the ability to see strange monsters after being scarred by a life-changing event. As it turns out, these creatures are linked to dangerous tragedies, and after Shinji discovers a sudden increase in monster appearances, he decides to join an investigation team to eradicate these monsters. The visual novel starts off fine enough. Our main character Shinji is haunted by these monsters, and the story creates this somber, melancholy atmosphere to reflect it. The problem is that after a certain point, it just tone shifts into dark, edgy thriller content. In its attempt to create shocking and unnerving moments, these monsters inhabiting humans ends up looking like cartoonish Monster of the Week villains, bullying, and very questionable forms of violence included. It's not horrifying, just tasteless and ridiculous with a heavy amount of yucky uncomfortableness. Not a fan. Terrible attempts at horror aside, whenever the characters aren't investigating, it acts like your typical anime harem rom-com, and it's not great here either. Every heroine here has very surface-level personalities and bare-bones development. No one stands out in particular, and I found them very forgettable. I fully believe Sakon Namorei Dreamers was trying to blend the two genres of school-life romance and supernatural horror together, but neither side held up well, nor do they complement each other significantly too. C tier. Real Life Plus is a romance visual novel where you grow up together with your childhood friend, and depending on the choices you make, changes their relationship and their lives. On paper, it's about as close to the base definition of what an anime visual novel is. When you actually look inside though, you can see it is exactly the base definition of an anime visual novel. Immediately, you can tell how low quality, arguably lazy, this game is. The backgrounds are generic stock anime environments, the UI is poorly designed with horribly clashing colors, and the music mixing is genuinely rough. Being hit with the first track when I started this game jump scared the hell out of me. It's that loud. As for the story, not only does it have a very basic premise, but the characters are very dull. Koichi is a self-insert protagonist, which is fine, that's a well-worn tradition in visual novels, but even self-insert characters need something to them. With Koichi, you have three things: likes anime, likes video games, and later in the story, develops a strong interest in sleeping with his childhood friend. That's about it. There's nothing remarkable or notable about him. Kaname doesn't fare much better either. She mostly just goes along with whatever Koichi wants. No pushback, no strong sense of self, just a character who accepts whatever outrageous demand he has for her. If you look at it a certain way, the dynamic between them starts to feel less like a sweet childhood romance and more like one person consistently steamrolling the other into getting what they want, which is not a great look. The story tries to introduce some drama conflict, but it's so short and resolves too quickly that it barely makes any meaningful impact despite its game mechanics. Real Life Plus, without a doubt, is the weakest visual novel I've read, objectively. F tier. Shiny Days makes me irrationally angry. I'm just gonna be upfront with it. I got so mad that I genuinely dropped this visual novel. I don't drop VNs, but this one got me so upset that I had to stop before I punched my screen. Shiny Days is the remake of Summer Days, a spin-off sequel to the original School Days. The story follows Setsuna as she steps in to cover Sekai's part-time job after she gets sick. She's uncomfortable with the uniform and she has zero waitressing experience. The only reason why she sticks around is because Makoto lives nearby. A golden opportunity to see him more often, only to unfortunately run into a girl named Inori who ends up becoming her roommate. From what I've seen online and from people I know, they generally like Setsuna. I do too, although I could argue it's because everyone else sucks. And that kinda sums up the social vibe in Shiny Days. Almost everyone is just an asshole to Setsuna. Being unlikable, that's fine. Being rude to Setsuna, that's where I draw the line. That's a big no-no in my book. I found Shiny Days to be a pain, and that's even before the writing and the characters, when the game actually works. I counted 25 crashes. 25 crashes until I had enough and just quit reading altogether. I ended up finding a 5-year-old forum thread just to get advice on how to get the thing running consistently. And even then, it kept breaking on me. I wish the greatest of luck to anyone trying to play Shiny Days on modern systems. Regardless, most of my complaints here are similar with the original School Days. It's slow and it's dull to watch outside of explosively reactive scenes. I fully bet Shiny Days continues to have the trend of heavily explicit scenes, romance soap opera drama, and over-the-top dramatic bad endings. If you're into that from the original School Days, hey, props to you. I refuse to play this ever again. F tier. And those were the worst visual novels I've ever read ranked. Let me know which visual novels you've read that were either disappointing, frustrating, or unsatisfying. I would love to hear them. I would also like to thank everyone on Patreon for supporting me and covering visual novels. You guys are fantastic, and if you'd like to be a part of that effort, please consider subscribing. Now, if you're interested in another ranking tier list video, like my highest rated visual novels of all time, you want to check out this video over here, or click here for another general visual novel recommendation video.